Good morning, and thank you for joining us early on your Wednesday. My name is Adeel Ahmad, Project Director here at Intralink Korea's Seoul office, and I look forward to walking you through the transition of Korea's marine industry that's currently underway and why that should be of interest to UK companies. Just a quick note on the agenda. I'll begin with an introduction to Korea as a market. Then I'll go through overviews of each of the key sectors within the industry, followed by key trends in these sectors, opportunities for UK companies, as well as challenges you may face while doing business in Korea. And then finally, we'll have the chance to wrap up with a Q&A. Before we get started, I guess just a quick introduction to who we are as Intralink. We are an international business development consultancy that specializes in East Asia. We've got offices in Korea, China, Japan, and Taiwan here in Asia, as well as a 30-year track record in these markets. And really what we do is make it fast, easy, and cost-effective to achieve commercial success here in Asia. And we've got a network of senior contacts at all of the major groups in each of the Asian markets where we operate. Just an introduction to South Korea as a market. It's got a population of 52 million, slightly smaller than the UK. As of last year, it is among the 10 largest economies worldwide, slightly above Canada, but below some of the largest European economies, such as Germany, the UK, or France. It's quite an easy place to do business, I think, all things considered. And I think one perhaps quite important thing to know about Korea is that I certainly wasn't surprised when the Bloomberg Innovation Index ranked Korea as the most innovative country in the world this year. Korea spends more on R&D as a percentage of its GDP than virtually any country in the world, approximately 4.5%. Another indicator that may be of interest to you is that Korean companies are the fourth largest filer of international patents. Korea has a fairly strong growth rate for a developed economy, generally hovering right around that 3% mark. Of course, last year there was a contraction of 1%, but in fact, if you compare that to some of the largest economies in Europe and North America, actually, I think Korea had one of the, if not the strongest performances during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it was just a contraction of 1% last year compared with larger contractions in other major markets. Let's get into our sector overviews. I think if you haven't had the chance to read our report, that certainly is okay, but I think if there was one key takeaway, it would be that what's underway right now is a large-scale digitalization and decarbonization in the marine industry, in industries like shipbuilding, ports and infrastructure, as well as offshore energy. There's a tremendous amount of spending from not just the government, but shipbuilders, telcos, major energy companies in these initiatives. What that means is the big shipbuilders, Samsung, Hyundai, Daewoo, are spending billions of pounds on autonomous ships powered by clean energy. The government, the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, is spending 29 billion pounds to develop 12 smart ports by the year 2040. The National Energy Roadmap, the 3020 plan, is calling for 12 gigawatts of offshore wind, 1 gigawatt of tidal energy, as well as 220 megawatts of wave energy by 2030. Now, Korea considers the marine industry to be strategically important, but in areas such as smart ship technology or the automation of its ports, it's lagging behind its rivals. What that means is for companies that can offer the technologies and the solutions that can help Korea not just catch up in the areas where it lags, but really become a leader globally. There are tremendous opportunities, of course, for UK companies that offer these solutions as well. A few that I've highlighted here are autonomous navigation for ships, clean energy for ships, but also looking at offshore energy, and then, of course, smart logistics, thinking of the greater connectivity and automation in ports and infrastructure. If I give maybe just a quick definition of what exactly it is that we mean when we talk about a Korean marine industry. So really, we're looking at four main sectors. It's shipbuilding, energy, logistics, by which we mean ports and infrastructure, and then marine services, things like finance, R&D, etc. Korea is a global leader in shipbuilding. It's the largest shipbuilding industry in the world, currently worth about 20 billion pounds, but projected to grow by about 50% over the next decade. The big three shipbuilders in Korea are Hyundai Heavy Industries, Samsung Heavy Industries, and Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine, also known as DSME. These three, between them, have 20% global market share, as well as approximately 90% of the domestic market. Behind them or around them is an ecosystem of more than 500 companies, which includes mid-sized or smaller shipbuilders such as STX or Dongsuh, systems integrators, as well as suppliers of components to the major shipbuilders. Looking at energy, Korea is a small, densely populated country with limited natural resources. Just for a point of reference, Korea is less than half the size of the UK. What you see here, this map here, is the Korean Peninsula. So it's both North and South Korea. The southern part of this peninsula right here is the country of South Korea. Korea, I think, largely relies on oil, coal, and gas for more than 80% of its energy. Nuclear energy makes up about 10%, and renewable energy, mostly solar and onshore wind, supply about 8% of that portfolio. I guess marine energy sources such as onshore wind, tidal, and wave are considered to be at a pre-commercial stage, but I think we can expect, the government is expecting a lot more of them in the years to come. There are, I guess, to shift gears slightly, there are 5 major ports in Korea, which if you think about it, is effectively an island surrounded by water on 3 sides. And then the border with North Korea, the land border with North Korea to the north. There are 5 major ports in Korea. You've got Busan in the southeast of the country, Ulsan just above it, then Incheon and Gyeongtaek in the northwest of the country, finally Yeosu in the southwest. Korea also has well-developed markets for marine insurance, marine financing, as well as R&D services. And just a quick look at the key players across the marine industry. Of course, at the top left here, you've got the major shipbuilders, Hyundai Heavy Industries, Samsung Heavy Industries, DSME, and STX. Port operators, most notably BPA, the Busan Port Authority, that is currently leading a major overhaul of the Busan port. You've got telcos. Korea has 3 major telcos, SK Telecom, LGU+, KT. All 3 of them are quite active in the smart port initiatives currently underway. Looking at power companies, I think most notable there is Korea Offshore Wind Power. And then looking at the bottom row there, you've got financial institutions, insurance companies, government agencies, the research institutes, I'll highlight here because they do a lot of the core R&D, not just for energy, but also smart ship technology, and help support the development of those industries, including the private sectors. And then finally, on the bottom right-hand corner, you've got ministries such as the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, which is leading the Smart Port Project, Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, and other ministries that are quite significant for the regulatory influence that they have. That's it for the overview. I think we can get now into the key trends in each of these sectors. So I'll start with shipbuilding, and the image you see here on the right is the smart ship platform that Samsung Heavy Industries has developed. I had the chance to see this firsthand when I visited their R&D center in Daejeon, about 2 hours south of Seoul. So Korean shipbuilders, as I mentioned, are very much world-class. They've led this industry for 15, if not 20 years when they took over Japanese shipbuilders. But really what they're trying to do is they're now in turn facing a challenge from Chinese shipbuilders. But what Korean shipbuilders are focusing on is digitalization and sustainability in the form of decarbonization as tools for maintaining their edge over Chinese competitors. I think one area where I think Korea certainly does lead in the broader shipbuilding industry, particularly in complex designs, including LNG vessels. But I think Korea does lag behind China and Japan in core smart ship technologies. So what you're seeing, though, is significant investments from the major shipbuilders in smart ship technologies. Each of them, as you can imagine, has their own autonomous ship platform, such as you see on the right. I think the major shipbuilders have achieved level 2 autonomous ships. The goal is to have level 3 autonomous ships that I think increasingly are capable of navigating without human input, and then level 4, which again further minimizes the role of humans by 2030. Looking at the decarbonization or clean energy aspects of shipbuilding trends, Hyundai, of course, investing heavily in both aspects, smart ships and clean ships, I think they announced just last month that they will be using the SOFC technology of Ceres Power, a UK-based company that we've been working with now here in Korea for several years. Samsung, meanwhile, announced a partnership in 2019 with the US-based SOFC provider, Bloom Energy. Moving on to trends in ports and infrastructure, let's start with some regulatory changes. So I think in keeping with the broader international trends, Korea has passed laws over the past few years targeting air pollution from the shipping industries, with the goal of having or reducing by 50% the pollution caused by the shipping industry in ports and in areas surrounding those ports. So the goal is to reduce it by 50% over the next couple of years. And the way that they're going to do it is by allocating a budget of 81 million pounds. That's a 400% increase over what was previously the budget. And I think a key area of focus is going to be the sulfur content in fuel in ports. So as of 2020, vessels are limited to 0.5% sulfur content in what are called control zones. That covers certainly, or that includes all 5 major ports. The restrictions are even tighter when vessels are berthing or anchoring at ports. The sulfur content must be 0.1%. And then as of next year, starting in 2022, that lower limit will also apply when navigating in the control zone. So you can see that there is a strong regulatory pressure towards, I think, cleaner fuel in the shipping industry. Looking at ports and infrastructure and how they're being made more digital, I think Korea, as I mentioned earlier, is effectively an island, and it's also a trade-reliant nation. So 87% of all international trade passes through its ports, more than half of it through one of the 5 major ports. And yet, despite the strengths of its infrastructure, particularly its digital infrastructure and its public transport network, Korean ports lag behind ports in China, Japan, and Singapore for automation and connectivity. So I think the linchpin of this large 29 billion pound smart port transformation that actually is quite a long-term project, more than 10 years. The linchpin of this project is very much going to be the transformation of Busan Port. You see it here on the right, one of the largest in the world, and it's going to be a 9 billion pound investment in technologies such as AI, smart city technology, electric vehicles, fuel cell generation, to make it much more of a connected, greener port and part of the broader industrial infrastructure as well. You're also seeing shipping companies using things like blockchain and big data to improve their logistics services. Moving on to marine energy, Korea is certainly not a leader in this right now. The current offshore wind capacity is just 124 megawatts, but the plan is to obviously increase that massively, adding 12 gigawatts by 2030. There are still issues relating to offshore wind. I think the regulation and some of the incentives around this industry haven't always been that consistent. And so what you sometimes see is, whereas it takes 6 months for a solar project to kind of get started, it can take years, up to 7 years sometimes, for offshore wind. On the other hand, when it comes to tidal power, Korea is quite strong, very much a leader, particularly in tidal plant power construction. But generation technologies, I think, are sourced still from overseas, mainly from Europe. Wave power is also a strength. Korea ranks 3rd in the world here, after the UK and China. One area of concern, though, is Korea still does lack technology to maximize the efficiency of when operating wave power stations. I think state of ocean thermal technology is quite robust as well, and there's a planned test upcoming of a 1 megawatt plant. Let's look at marine services. This is, we'll start with insurance. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, the Korean insurance market is quite large, one of the largest in the world. This market is also increasingly open to international firms. Actually, if you look at this market more closely, the number of international firms operating actually is greater than the number of domestic firms. I think there are 17 international firms and 13 domestic companies. But as you may not be surprised to learn, those 13 domestic companies control more than 95% of the market. But at the same time, I think your 2 key trends are that, number one, the share of the market controlled by international firms, although it's quite small, is in fact growing every year. And number two, Korean insurance companies are increasingly looking overseas for growth, looking to the UK for growth. I think it was just a few years ago that a Korean insurance firm listed on the UK Lloyd's market for the first time. One thing that you often see in marine insurance specifically is that shipbuilders, I think particularly for Samsung and Hyundai, being part of some very large groups, they often have a subsidiary in the same group that specializes in marine insurance. That certainly is the case for both Samsung Heavy Industries and Hyundai Heavy Industries. Marine financing, on the other hand, is perhaps not as hot of an industry as marine insurance. This is, I think, shown fairly slow growth over the last several years, really, I think, in a bit of a decline following, I think, the demand broadly for vessels. The key financiers in the market here are the Korea Export-Import Bank, K-SURE, and KDB, the Korea Development Bank. Major shipbuilders also provide planning and design services, and I think the marine R&D market is quite large compared with other sectors, such as, for example, the automotive or semiconductor sectors, both of which Korea is quite strong in, and that range of R&D services includes everything from ships, offshore plants, ports, surveying, consulting services, and even software. So what opportunities or what challenges might UK companies face as they try to do business in Korea's marine industry? Let's start with the opportunity areas. So I think one thing I can say is that in the course of preparing this report, we had the opportunity to meet with major shipbuilders, many of the key government institutes and ministries involved, and across the board, I think in every sector, there is a demand for best-in-class technologies, and I think it doesn't really matter so much if this is coming from a Korean company or a UK company. I think the demand is certainly there for innovative technologies that can help companies do what it is that they're trying to do. I think particularly in shipbuilding, areas of interest are, of course, navigation, but also things like collision detection and avoidance. I think remote diagnostic systems are quite important, as is data processing, the ability to, I think, collect data on a ship and then transmit it, back to shore. Also of interest to the major shipbuilders as well as their suppliers will be fuel optimization and the ability to control emissions. Looking at ports, logistics, traffic optimization, refueling stations for hydrogen vehicles, as well as fuel cell power generation are areas of interest. In energy, I think all of the core technologies for offshore wind, tidal, and wave technologies are areas where I think Korea is eager to work with overseas companies, particularly UK companies. And in marine services, I think marine insurance, that's a segment where I think the key players in Korea are increasingly looking for collaboration overseas, while at the same time you are seeing more of a role for international firms here. R&D services are also an area of opportunities, particularly when it comes to engineering. So I think it's quite clear that there is a range of opportunities for UK companies in Korea. I think we've covered all the good things, but what are the challenges that UK companies may face when it comes to taking advantage of those opportunities? I think first and foremost will be the lack of a local presence. I don't think that on principle, Korean companies oppose doing business with a foreign company. I think what they much prefer, though, is if that company has a local presence or at least has an in-country partner that is able to provide real-time support, preferably in Korean, without, I think, the barriers of obviously language, but also time difference. For reference, Korea is 8 hours ahead of the UK. Another point of concern would be regulatory differences. I think thinking of, for example, connected technologies or any type of, IoT solution, often Korea works on either different frequency bands or is using, I think, a different standard from what certainly UK companies may be accustomed to. And finally, the public sector procurement process is something that can be quite challenging, I think, particularly in sectors such as ports or energy, where the best way to take advantage of an opportunity may be to sell to a government customer, in which I think in many, if not most cases, will require going through the Central Public Procurement Service, PPS. They do have an English language website, but I think fully understanding that process, is not easy if you are in the UK. So I think that is really the presentation that I had prepared. Once again, thank you so much for your time. I think if you have any questions, of course, please feel free to ask now or to reach out later on by email. And of course, if there's any way that we as Intralink can support what it is that you're doing in Asia, we would certainly love to hear from you. So thank you.